I was an expert in litigation for about 10 years. I presented some of what I learned in civil litigation to the FBI and the Department of Justice, and that case led to the biggest criminal fine in U.S. history as of 2009. I testified in a federal trial in 2010, and the jury found Pfizer guilty of fraud and racketeering violations. In terms of violating the law, it's a routine occurrence. The drug companies have paid $38 billion worth of fines from, I think, 1991 to 2017. It's never been enough to stop the misrepresentation of their data, and rarely are the fines greater than the profits that were made. Executives have not gone to jail for misrepresenting data that have involved tens of thousands of deaths in the case of Vioxx, OxyContin. When companies plead guilty to felonies, which is not an unusual occurrence, the government usually allows the companies, the parent companies, to allow subsidiaries to take the plea so that they are not one step closer to getting disbarred from Medicare. There is a mechanism that is appearing to impose law and order on drug company behavior, but it's clearly not enough. It's not working. It's sociopathic behavior to have viewers of ads leave the ad with an unrealistic impression of the benefits and harms of the drug. And yet he's playing by the rules. He's doing his job as CEO to maximize the effect of his advertising. And if he doesn't do it, he'll get fired and the next guy will. Trulicity is a diabetes drug for type 2 diabetes, an injectable drug, and it lowers blood sugar just about as well as metformin does. Metformin costs about $4 a month. Trulicity costs, I think, $6,200 a year. Trulicity has distinguished itself because the manufacturer did a study that showed that it significantly reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease in diabetics. And they got approval on the basis of that study, that very large study being statistically significant. The ads obviously extol the virtues of Trulicity because it reduces the risk of heart disease and stroke, one of the major morbidities, risks of type 2 diabetes. What the ad doesn't say is that you have to treat 323 people to prevent one non-fatal event at $2.7 million. Even more importantly, the ad doesn't say that the evidence shows that engaging in an active, healthy lifestyle program reduces the risk of heart disease and strokes far more than Trulicity. And that study was done, actually, in the 90s. It's called the Diabetes Prevention Program. It was federally funded by the NIH. So there wasn't this drug company imperative to try to prove your drug was better than nothing. It was a very well-designed study, randomized controlled trial in people who were at high risk of diabetes, so-called pre-diabetics, and they were randomized to 3 different groups: a placebo group, a group that got treated with metformin, and a group that got treated with intensive lifestyle counseling. This study tested whether you can get people in a randomized controlled trial assigned to intensive lifestyle changes, whether that works. The common wisdom amongst physicians, and I think in general, is that you can't get people to change. You can do whatever you want. You can stand on your head. You can beg and plead. People won't change. So give it up and let's move on with the drugs and not waste time. Except this study, published in the New England Journal, I think in 2002, shows that's wrong. The people in the intensive lifestyle group ended up losing 10 pounds, exercising 5 times a week, maintaining it, and reduced their risk of getting diabetes by 58% compared to the metformin group, which reduced its risk of getting diabetes by 31%. That exact study was done, and it showed that lifestyle intervention is the winner. It doesn't make sense to me to allow a drug to be advertised as preventing cardiovascular disease when you haven't included lifestyle changes as an arm in the study. But that's part of the problem of our advertising. You would think in a rational society that was way out on a limb as a lone country, besides New Zealand, that allows direct-to-consumer advertising, that part of allowing direct-to-consumer advertising would be to mandate that the companies establish whether their drug is better than, say, healthy lifestyle adoption to prevent the problems that they claim to be preventing. But we don't require that. The companies can afford to do very large studies so that very small differences become statistically significant, and their studies are asking, how can we sell more drug? They're not asking, how can we prevent cardiovascular disease in people with type 2 diabetes? We're now in the extreme arm of this distortion of our medical knowledge of studying how to sell more drugs than how to make people more healthy. If the drug companies want to spend their money advertising, they should have independent analysis of the message that the viewers are left with about the drug so that it's realistic. What's the chance the drug will help them? Well, in Trulicity, it's 1 out of 323. What's the true cost? When drugs advertise that you may get this for a $25 copay or something, a tens of thousands of dollars a year drug for a $25 copay, what an enormous disservice that is to misrepresent the cost to society. That should not be allowed. So you should have to make it clear to the viewers how many people are going to benefit, what's your chance of benefiting, how does it compare to lifestyle changes or less expensive therapies? What do you give up if you use a less expensive therapy or gain? How much it costs. Now, that can go either way, because if you say Humira costs $72,000 and it's no more effective as a first-line drug than methotrexate, which costs $480, people might say, I want the expensive drug because I can get it for a $25 copay. We could require that there be outside evaluation of the message that reasonable, unbiased viewers take away from the ads, and the ads would have to tell the truth about the drug. When an article is peer-reviewed and published in a respected journal, people and doctors assume that the peer reviewers had access to the data, they've independently analyzed the data, and they corroborate the findings in the manuscript that was submitted, or they give feedback to the authors and say, we disagree with you on this point. Would you please check our analysis? That's what they assume the peer review process is, but it's not. The peer reviewers don't have the data. The peer reviewers have the manuscript submitted, usually in conjunction with or by the drug company that manufactures the drug. So peer reviewers are unable to perform the job that doctors think they're performing to vet the data to assure that it's accurate and reasonably complete. They can't do it. And then we have the clinical practice guidelines, which are increasingly more important as the flow of information keeps getting brisker and brisker, and docs need to get to the bottom line quickly. Clinical practice guidelines become much more important. We assume that the authors of those clinical practice guidelines have independently analyzed the data from the clinical trials and make their recommendations that set the standards of care based on their analysis. That's not what happens. The experts who write the clinical trials rely almost entirely on the publications presenting the results of the clinical trials, which are peer-reviewed, but the peer reviewers haven't had access to the data. So we've got a system of the highest level of evidence that doctors have been trained over and over again to rely on to practice evidence-based medicine to be good doctors that has not been verified. It's like trying to play a professional basketball game without referees and having players call their own fouls. But the players are paid to win, and you can't count on them to call their own fouls. So we have referees who are in charge. We don't have those referees in American healthcare. That's the biggest way that American healthcare is distinguished from healthcare in other wealthy nations. 96% of the research in clinical trials in the United States is about drugs and devices. And only a fraction of the 4% left over is about preventive medicine and how to make Americans healthier. We rank 68th in the world in healthy life expectancy, despite spending an extra $1.5 trillion a year. I believe strongly that the reason why we've gotten in this crazy position is because the knowledge that we're producing is about new drugs and devices. It's not about improving population health.